Welcome to the Arcfluence podcast, where we talk about how design impacts the way we live, work, and invest. I'm Nick Caracan, your host, and with me as always are my two amazing co-hosts, Paul Fatkins and Nino Samradic.
Pretty good. How are you?
Today, we are going to be talking about a fun topic that you guys are experts in for episode 12. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Just us, not you.
Well, I'm going to have my comments as usual, but...
Yeah, we're going to talk about smaller scale commercial projects, right? The projects that a larger firm might not necessarily want to take on, and a project that the scale of it for a single, person, firm, like, again, just a sole proprietor architect, might be too much for him to take on. So kind of somewhere in that sweet spot where if you have a couple of people in your firm like we have, it would be, perfect for us. And obviously, the price point we would give is highly beneficial compared to like a larger firm.
Yeah, because larger firm, as you guys know, they have bigger overheads, and that's what actually they cannot go under the certain point.
Yeah, they have project minimums. Paul's old firm actually had it was high.
It was high, and it also depends on the potential for further jobs too. So the other thing is they don't want to take on a one-off project where we're only going to do one of them and that's it. Goodbye, I'll never see you again.
And devote the stuff just on that project. Plus, once again, I think the biggest obstacle is just overheads. Overheads will just actually kill them because you have to go through all the same procedures. You're gonna burn that money as a firm through the small project pretty quickly.
Well, you're also, when you have these multi-million-dollar projects, you're gonna have. Sometimes you're gonna have to hire, right?
Sometimes you have to hire people.
And if this is a 2-year project, I mean, if this is a franchise and we're building multiple locations, well, now we're giving work stability to these new hires.
Exactly.
So we're gonna have work for 10 years for you.
Exactly, and that's why and you will also see quite often that a bigger firm or people from the bigger firm will actually refer to a smaller firm or firm they're just ready to take off, such as an Arcfluence.
Right. Yeah, we actually do get small commercial projects from other architecture firms that the project's just too small for them.
Yep.
So let's talk about what makes a commercial project smaller. What are some of the challenges that we face with that? I guess we can talk about, what's the definition of an actual commercial project? Because we do residential, like we have 4plexes and we're doing a 12plex here. There are a lot of different types of projects that are maybe residential housing, but still considered commercial projects.
Yeah, I think we start there, right? With what the difference is or what the trigger is for the residential side. And then basically if you have anything beyond that, it's pretty much commercial. But for residential, you have anything above 3 units. So as soon as you get into that 4-unit category, the fourth unit added on triggers the Ohio Building Code, and you're out of the residential code at that point.
So when I go down to the city to submit permits for our clients, if we have a triplex, a duplex, or a single-family home, I'm going to the residential side for permit submission, and it's a specific team that deals strictly with those. If we have a 4-unit or just retail, commercial, institutional projects, we go to the other side where it's all commercial based. And obviously there's different things that we have to boxes that we have to check when we do that.
One big things to understand is between these two is, as you guys already mentioned, one is going to have application of Residential Code of Ohio. The second is going to have implication of Ohio Building Code. And Ohio Building Code is just more stringent.
And it was just updated March 1st.
It was just updated. And it will actually just require bigger clearances. Will have a more restriction on fire ratings. It's gonna actually have implication of the ADA, which is American with Disability Act. So it means all your a restroom or your approaches to the building need to be ADA compliant. So there was a multiple things. You're actually stepping in a new arena that you have to pay attention and just have someone who has a good knowledge of the OBC to actually help you, professional who's going to help you navigate through the process.
I think another important thing to say too is when we are working with commercial projects, and again, that can be a 4-unit, fourplex, just
Exactly.
apartments. Now we're bringing in additional professionals to the scope of work here. We're bringing
Correct.
in engineers.
Yeah.
So we're going to have our plumbing, electrical, and mechanical drawings be done by a separate team that specifically.
Even sometimes technology, sometimes structural as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And civil.
Civil.
Yeah.
Exactly. Civil. So it was like it's just like it's just another level of standards that you need to satisfy. And in majority of cases, you will need help by the design professionalist.
There are some exceptions too. I know that you're still technically under the OBC, but there's exceptions where you can follow certain things within the residential code, even though you're a 4-unit building. But it depends, because if you have shared egress component, then all of a sudden you're locked into the R2 and forget it, you can't touch anything in the residential code.
Yep.
So all of this stuff has to be navigated, but as soon as you hit that 4th unit, you're primarily in the OBC.
Yeah, and one thing's worth mentioning is you're still gonna be residential. There is, as Paul mentioned, it's gonna because you will see, depending on what is the use of the building, they have classification of the use groups. For example, if you have office, there's going to be BUs, let's say for a business. If you have actually fourplex, it's going to be probably like what, R2?
R2 or R3.
Or R3 use. So, and based on these categories, there was like a different set of rules that actually apply to that project. And that's why the first thing that your design professionalist is going to establish is what is the use group for your project and what is the construction type. And these two elements will actually guide all the requirements for your project.
So we can start talking about a couple of our recent projects. I think that'll help us kind of understand a basic scope of work and our process. Paul, I know you were very involved with Be Aligned.
Yeah. So smaller conversion of office space to office space, which was highly beneficial, because anytime you get into conversion from one use to another, that'll also trigger additional things that have to be done and things that have to be met. You can't necessarily grandfather anything in. You're going to have to update everything at that point. So it was an office space to an office space. And we went in, and I think it was only about 3,000 square feet total. So we're talking relatively smaller, space. And, they do some chiropractic care there. They have like this vibe plate like area that like shakes you and gets the blood flowing.
And we needed the specs on those machines. Which I
Yeah,
thought
and they
was
have
cool.
like an X-ray, system that's set up to like take some basic X-rays so they can determine like the best course of treatment, stuff like that. But yeah, that was one of the recent projects we did up in Delaware County that went through and got approved and is in construction at this point. So
Yeah, now we found that project through the contractor, correct?
yeah. So we did another project before, which was a smaller, like 1,500, 1,300 square foot. So like half the size of Be Aligned, was Bamboo Drinks. And it was just a small scale, like Asian drink place where like the bubble tea place.
Tea.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Makes
So-
me miss New York City.
Yeah. And that was in a shopping center over off of near Upper Arlington. I forget, it was a Bethel Road, I believe.
Yep, right off Bethel.
So that one's actually done and they're opened and functioning.
Actually, I remember one more project that we actually did when we actually converted the former fast food place into the liquor store.
The drive-through.
Yeah.
Drive-through, exactly.
That was the one that
Yeah.
Nina helped
Yeah.
out on. Yeah.
So it's actually the interesting thing about that one is actually the change of the use. So that's like a one thing also that you have to pay attention. Then if you're switching from one use to another, then different set of rules may apply there. So that was like a good example of that. But also what is going to be easier if you're actually switching from one use to another. But there is also some certain request to maybe have like a former residential being turned into some kind of school. So that's actually going to trigger completely different use from switch from one use to another. So, and especially in this situation, you're definitely going to need the help by design professionalists.
Yeah, we had a client that was a single family home and they wanted to buy it and convert it into a private school. And, for whatever reason, I mean, like, for us, it's like, yeah, no brainer. Automatically, you're triggered into the OBC. You're following commercial requirements. It's basically a school. That's what you're running. That's the use, right? They, for whatever reason, thought, well, it's a private school. It's private. Like, we can just do whatever we want. We can just buy this house and use it for our purposes. And it's like, well, no, because the city knows what you're doing, because we have to submit stuff to the city. And if you tell them, yeah, we're renovating this single family house and we're going to use it as a school, they're not just going to be like, okay, sure, do whatever you want, because it's a private school.
So yeah,
then we had
the
to
main reason
Yeah.
for that, what is not the same, because the occupant load is not the same. If you have like a single family residential home, you're talking about 4 or 5 person max. If you have a school, you're gonna have 30 people in it, and
Yep.
it's not the same.
You can have
for
assembly spaces
exactly.
within a school.
It's not same for 5 people to escape the building in case of the emergency, or 30 people can get jammed in a door that is too narrow, can start falling down the stairs that is too sharp and steep and not wide enough, and there is a million things. And the
Life
reason
safety.
Yeah.
reason why this code are actually proposed, because of the accident that happens. So that's for why we actually respecting them, because you see the multiple accident, especially involving the fire, that's occurring every day in the United States, and codes are written only because of these bad experiences that people went through the life-changing event or losing their life into these buildings. So that's the major reason. Higher occupancy load usually comes with the commercial projects, and that's the reason why code is more stringent.
Yeah, one of the things that's actually changed in the recent code, speaking about adapting to things that happen, events that happen, they actually now have the ability within the code for locking facilities down and keeping people in. So like Nino was talking about egress and getting people out. Now the code is also adapting because these events happen where it's like it's a different situation. You actually need to lock and secure the people, and that's
Shelter
the safest.
them.
Yeah, shelter in place. That's the safest thing for them. So all of these codes, like Nino said, it's all about life safety. And now they've actually started to adapt some of them in the newer versions of code to actually shelter in place and keep people in versus having them egress out.
I think just one good example. We have several tornado warnings recently.
Yeah.
So if you have 30 kids in this building, you have to shelter them in space in case of the emergency. So that's why is once again why we have to obey the code and requirements.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned turning a house into a business. It's becoming very popular because people are now. We're actually working on an event space in Franklinton, and it's a residential home on Walnut.
Yes.
And basically, Paul's going to be going before the commission to help get approval and start the whole zoning process here. But we got preliminary drawings done, and we know right now that because it's becoming an assembly space, that those existing floor joists, they're not going to be okay. We're going to have to put some steel or beam reinforcement in those floors because now it is going to be a commercial space. We are no longer going to be using
higher
this as a
loads,
single-family
more
home.
people just
Exactly.
stamping and walking there. Then you have to provide ramp, ADA accessibility.
Yep.
All new restrooms you're doing should be ADA accessible.
And we have to make that appealing to the curb.
Exactly.
So the city approves the design.
Yep.
So there's a number of different things we have to consider, not just the function of it, but the curb appeal of it as well.
One another things I will drop there is you will see a lot of examples of that. It's a mixed use when you actually have apartment on a second floor and a first floor. It can be any space from the little like a small store selling the shoes to the fast food restaurant. And that's also what you're gonna see. And in these occasions, we call it mixed use because you have two different uses. Sometimes they're separated by floor, sometimes they're separated by the walls. But usually where in that occasions you have to pay attention is fire separation between uses. Sometimes it's not trigger. There are some uses that can actually cohabit next to each other without fire separation. But in majority cases you will need to treat those separately and fire separate them.
Yeah, actually, Paul, we're working on Mount Vernon right now. That is a restaurant space on the first floor that has 2 apartments above. And it's interesting, too, is in the past, that building, I think it was the second floor was not residential. It was
It was
storage, right?
offices,
Yeah,
technically.
offices. Okay.
Offices. So that one was a unique project because it's kind of in a residential area, and they had a variance that they basically had approval for, but it was a limited use approval where literally it said you can, yeah, sure, you can do this with the building and that's it. You can use the bottom floor for a nightclub, and you can use the upper floors for an office.
How long ago was that?
Those like 70s or 80s.
And does that hold true?
Yeah, unless they approve. So now that's part of the process the client has to go through is they have to reapply to zoning and say, well, we want to put in a restaurant, not a nightclub, in the lower space that's going to be open during daytime hours, not in the middle of the night, like bar situation. And then we want to do residential units up above versus offices. And they have to get approval for that specific use.
From the zoning.
Yeah, because they're locked into the other use that's already on the books.
It's kind of been a fun process for me because I'm working with the client to get the specs for like the hood and the kitchen equipment because our engineers, our mechanical engineers, electrical engineers need that information to put in the drawings because the city is getting very specific on what they're looking for when we're designing those type of commercial spaces.
And as soon as you have commercial kitchen, is there like what is that department that you have to go through that, like a food or
health department.
Health department, exactly. Yep. So the health department, there is like I know there is a special applications. It's not super complicated, but that's something you have to go through and satisfy all the requirements on that application.
Yeah, there's certain finishes that have to be easily cleanable and water resistant. You have to have certain hand washing stations,
grease interceptor, and all this stuff. Yep.
But going back to Nino's conversation about doing mixed use buildings, so this building that on Mount Vernon that was a bar and office spaces, it was more appealing and more valuable to our client to have apartments up there because it kind of diversifies his portfolio, protects his asset.
Yes.
So we had that conversation. We were having the conversation. Can we fit 3 in here? Can we fit 4 in here? I'm like, these are really these. Then they become like studios, and I don't think you're going to get the value that you're actually looking for.
But similar to Walnut, he was also looking for maybe possibility having having this addition of
we did. Yeah, we had one.
We have actually
apartment.
one unit, so he can actually if that commercial space starts a little bit slow, he always can diversify portfolio of the property and make it workable.
So we did a clever thing on that one. So the event space where he's going to do performing arts.
Yes.
The apartment has this door that randomly opens. It's a fire rated door that can lock. Excuse me. And now you can open this door to a Juliet balcony that overlooks the stage.
So you almost have your separate like a box where you actually like a VIP person can actually watch the performance, stand up comedy or God knows what.
Yeah, so that can be just kept to the theater
Extension,
or he can rent it out as an Airbnb. Like he has a lot of different options there, which I thought was really cool.
Different options, exactly. Yeah. That's a very good example. But we also have to deal with this fire separation, which is in this case is 2 hours fire separation between event space, which is, as Paul mentioned, is assembly. And assembly is one of these which is one of the more stringent because it's just a high number of the people on a small space. So occupant load is really high.
What's the square footage for this Walnut project?
I don't recall.
Is it like what? It's under 2,000.
It's like it's around 2,000.
Yeah, it's under 2,000. But the assembly space is occupant load is over 50, which automatically triggers 2 exits out.
Yeah.
So I believe that it's close to 1,000 square feet is the event space.
Yeah.
And it's not just 2 exits. It's one is an ADA accessible and the other one has an area of refuge.
Area of refuge. And there is that's like a things that you guys, there is just a lot of in and outs, and that's I'm thinking why is design professionalist it's very important. We have like a previous podcast with a gentleman who was doing affordable housing, explaining how architectural thing just happened to be ArcFluence, help them navigate through the very complicated process of the approval. For this one, it's even more complicated, and it's much easier if you deal with these items right in the front than during construction.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I was just curious the size because all of these projects that we're talking about, I think the smallest one is just over 1,000 square feet, 1,200, and the largest one is around
3,000,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
for all of these different projects that we're talking about, we're not talking about a massive amount of
No.
space. I mean, heck, like, you know,
Your
my
home-
house,
your
my
home is
square
bigger.
footage. Well, no, it's not bigger, but I mean, like, it's comparable, right? It fits within that range from the 1 to 3,000. It fits within that range.
I think you can actually change your house easily to
Yeah.
the school, man.
Exactly.
How big it is.
Yeah.
I think your
but-
point is if a firm has a $25,000 or a $50,000 minimum where they're not even going to consider
No,
a
they-
project.
Well, that and all of these projects have to follow the code, no matter what.
No,
Right?
but
It does. So, like all of these things, the requirements that we're talking about, if
They're
you
held
have
to
a
the
couple
same
hundred square foot
standards.
space, it has to
I
meet
mean,
the standard.
if I'm like just going like working for a big firm on enormous projects, like you still have to put like a cover sheet. You have to put all these reference sheets. You have to put life safety sheets. You still have to produce decent document. And with the overhead that this firm is applying into their the rates, how they actually, and they including like a 15 to 20% profit, they're gonna charge you very high prices, which smaller firm are more flexible with, or they're just gonna lose the money.
Right.
And therefore, it was like for them is like to just, and plus keep in mind these people working on big projects, they already have devoted stuff. Now I have to pull out someone from the big project to work on something very small.
Yeah, it's not worth hiring a new person for the small
No.
project. And if you're pulling off somebody to do that for a larger project, now you're putting a huge contract in jeopardy in some
Exactly.
cases, which you don't want to mess with
You
because
don't
that
wanna
could
mess-
that could
exactly.
impact your business for the next 5 to
I
10
mean,
years.
I'm project manager on my project. I will never let my stuff just like a sprinkler around because I will like them concentrated on this big stuff.
Of course.
Because it's such easy to lose the grasp of the project. So that's the reason why you will have to I actually advise personally to go like this mid-size. No one person, one business trying to handle everything by himself. We all know that it doesn't work, especially in this modern environment, and especially in an environment such Columbus is, when the code requirements are very important, not just code, but
Yeah.
zoning as well.
Even the recent code change, one of the things that we were dealing with one of our 4-unit buildings that came up. So the 2024 code, the existing building code, they actually like specify you either have to do a prescriptive approach with the
Right.
existing building, a work area approach, or a performance approach in order to meet the requirements within the existing building code. So there's 3 different compliance paths that you can take, and that's something that's new. Before, when we were in the older code, you didn't have the existing building code where you had these 3 different compliance paths that were in play. You could just submit a set of drawings and you were good, and whatever, it's existing. Okay.
And the city won't advise you on it either. You're going to have to lean on your design professionals to help you make that
Exactly.
decision.
Yeah.
And another thing important, what Ryan mentioned in previous podcast, is the relationships that the design professionals has with all these officials in the zoning and in a building department. And you will see, and many our clients will mention such a good relationship, especially that Nick and Paul maintain with both departments in the city of Columbus. So that's gonna be because we're all human. Relationship are key and important, and that's really important. To make just entire process be more smoother for your small pizza shop or like a little like a restaurant or even for this chiropractic the office, which
Or
is
your
some kind of the
12plex.
medical office building. It's
Yeah.
pretty much medical office building.
Yeah.
So it's nothing big, nothing large. For them, it's just to open the business and run their business, and we are there just to help them to go through all this procedure and make space safe, well designed, usable, and one that's gonna age well, and it's just gonna satisfy multiple uses. As we talk about the walnut, can be 3 different uses for one building.
So let's do an exercise. I'm an investor. I have a commercial property. I'm going to be changing the use from a restaurant, from an office space to a restaurant, and potentially have an apartment or two above. I want to engage an architect and get some help for drawings to make this happen. Now, obviously, I'm probably going to be borrowing some money. I don't have all the cash to invest in it. I'm going to be getting loans and stuff. So when do I engage my design professional? What timeline should I expect depending on some of these variables that I just threw out at you? And then when are we looking to bring in our contractor? What are some of my expectations with funding? And I can speak to the funding portion a little bit.
So I can maybe start and Paul will just follow up. When I'm gonna engage the design professional, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
The sooner the better.
Day one.
Exactly. Day one, because every property is unique, regardless. Even if your neighbor is doing something that I'm just gonna repeat it. Your set of the constraints and opportunities. And many people, when I say like, oh, I have to hire this one guy, he's just gonna charge me for something that maybe I can sketch by myself, me and my wife at home. But I will not start conversation with constraints. I will start conversation with opportunities. We are in this business for so long. We know what we're doing. And also we can pass all our previous clients who have such a satisfaction, and we just discovered new stuff. They're just changing the height of the space, can make space much bigger. Nice organized space. Can just explore territories that you didn't have in your mind and just make your property better looking than your neighbors.
So I want to hire you, Nino. How long? What should I expect in terms of, and this is to you, Paul, too.
Yeah, I was going to add in as well to his unique comment, right? A lot of these spaces are existing. Yep. There's something that's there. It's not a piece of dirt that we're, if you want to do that, great, we can do that too.
Greenfield, yeah.
But majority of people, like you said, Nick, there might be an investor, they have certain things in mind. And so like they're buying a property that's run down, they want to do this conversion on it, right? It was office, but they see potential here as something else. So it's an existing building that's already built and was up and running at some point. Now we're coming in to do this work. So that's also what makes these projects so unique. And there's certain things that we have to respond to based on what's there already. So I mean, like that factors into it as well. It's not a clean slate where we can do whatever.
Yeah, and first things that
which will impact timeline as well.
Sure.
The first thing as an architect is we should actually go scan the space to see what is there, and then we actually propose design schedule.
And if you guys want to hear more about our scanning, our very sophisticated scanning process, we have another podcast on that Danny will reference in the show notes.
Yes. And the design schedule will actually tells you like it always can be customized, basics on how urgent is needed to project to be done. So it can go from like from 1 month to several months depending on the size, complexity of the projects, different parties being involved. But every designer, every architect should be actually putting a design schedule. And this design schedule usually is for a small project, doesn't always necessary to have these 3 important phases, which is SD, DD, and CD.
Can you explain those terms?
Yes. So SD is the schematic design. And in this phase, we are pretty much starting with the bubble diagram, with setting up the program, understanding the client needs, and then we actually going through different iterations and the options. Yeah. Then we're going to meet with the client, and we get the feedbacks and adjust our initial design and our initial understanding.
Essentially some basic design that occurs.
Exactly. Let's do a first sketches. And these sketches will usually involve not only the layout of the floor plan, maybe it also involves some design features, maybe some first 3D looks, the exterior elevations, window placement, maybe check even material representation and suggestions, Maybe some spaces will even require to maybe engage our interior design team as well. So this is going to be like a first things when we actually developing our idea, something more concrete. Soon as a client agrees, like, okay, this is direction we're going, we're doing the SD sign off.
And that process on a small commercial project typically takes us a couple weeks.
Yes, it can go like pretty quick, depending of the complexity of the project. But a small project can go pretty quickly, and then
also depending on the client. If the client has a million ideas, right, there might be some back and forth. So if they sign off on something that we propose, great, we move forward, right? Otherwise, we go back and we revise, and then have another conversation with the client. And
sure.
What about this?
The next phase, it's a design development. That means our SD so we know what we're doing. The plan is developed. Excuse me, and now it's time to get a little bit more involved, or our consultants. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, technology, structural. Structural is probably going to be also early involved in SD or MEP as well, especially if you have certain units, loads, we have some basic understanding. But now in the DD, everything start merging together, and we're going through the process of the first coordination.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, office to restaurant. Well, if you have an office use, there's certain electrical demand that's coming from office. Maybe like a server room might be like your highest demand because it's constantly running, might have its own dedicated, cooling system.
Circuit.
And circuitry for, and backup power. You could have an uninterrupted power supply that's providing power if the power goes off, or a generator. So there's things for an office, but a restaurant, heck, maybe it's a sustainable, the owner has sustainable principles in mind, and they don't want to have any gas equipment. And so all their equipment, their fryers, their cooktops, it's all electric. I mean, the demand for electric is going to be a lot higher for all these pieces of equipment, right? So it's like that's a conversation to have with the electrical engineer at that point. For your HVAC, same thing. Your exhaust is going to pull air out, and you have to push air back in to supplement what you're pulling out for the exhaust, and all of a sudden it becomes much more complicated because an office is a very different environment for your mechanical use than a restaurant. So again, like at that point, all of these people are coming into the conversation and talking about, well, from an office to a restaurant, what do we have to do?
And I know for some of our restaurant projects, we have the conversation of how many fixtures, what type of equipment. Because when we are adding sinks and bathrooms and all these things that require plumbing, we have to, and it's a building, I hate the word strip mall, but if it's a center of a commercial center from the 1970s, then we need to check the utilities. Like, what is the water line that's coming in? It's probably undersized if it was used for something else other than a restaurant. So now we need to look at increasing the size of that water line.
And that's why it's a key to have all your design members involved as early as possible, so they can actually scan the space, they can do the walkthroughs, they can actually assess the existing condition. And in that case, they know what is going to be next step. And also, like one thing I forgot to mention during the SD phase is also like a design team can also offer you like a first glimpse of the potential cost of all changes that you have to do earlier on. So in that case, you can see if budget that you dedicated to it is enough for all these changes, because there is always this like a game between the scope and the budget.
And you're talking predominantly for construction costs, because our design stuff is usually locked in on smaller scale projects at that point.
Yeah. So, but that's something like that you have basic understanding. It was like sometimes our wishes are bigger than our budget is, so we have to reduce the scope.
And it gives you the opportunity, like, hey, we don't have that funding.
Correctly.
So now we can modify.
And you avoid, like as Paul mentioned, you could, like, as first you have some old circuitry, and you need more circuits like for your electrical power, and suddenly that's a huge expense. Now you have to maybe shrink on your like finishes. You maybe use a little bit more economical side in order to afford, which is something that is now you're understanding priorities in your project. And DD is also really important because now all these layers starts overlapping. Now we're having something that is called coordination process. And this is during the DD, client still can have good input on it and make some changes.
Paul and I actually just had a conversation on, the apartments and restaurant project where that panel for the restaurant was in the corridor to the apartments.
Yeah,
that's
we had
fire
to
rated.
make some updates, and
So
it ended up in the corridor.
And in
Because it
some
was an
cases, we could
existing-
reuse the panel, but in this particular case, it doesn't make sense.
Well,
No.
it was an existing panel in a certain spot, and the only place to get the egress out and put that corridor was in the location that the panel was. So it's like, well, if we keep it there, now all of a sudden it's in this corridor for the residential unit.
Yeah.
You know.
Doesn't affect design costs, but does impact your construction costs.
Exactly. Yeah. And then after we actually solidified like our DD phase and everything is nice and hanky dory, we have base and client has understanding with all outlets requirements, with all these HVAC requirements, structural. For example, one things we see quite often when existing space, we always try to have these big open spans, less walls that always gonna trigger some additional beams and stuff. Soon as we actually, and client is aware of that, now we're going to this, I will call it CD phase, which is construction document phase, or I call this focus phase, when actually design team, everything is dialed up, DD is signed off, and now we're going to the final development of the document.
Yeah.
About
and
how-
this is the document that communicates everything to the person that's actually going to do the work on site.
Exactly.
And this is what the city's going to be proving during their
Yeah, and
approval
to what
process.
the city reviews and approves.
So on average for our smaller commercial projects, what's that timeline typically look like to the best of your?
Depending on the size, can be a few weeks up to a few months.
But for us, I mean, I don't know any projects that we've had. I guess maybe I can think of one off the top of my head that's been a few months.
Yeah, it's usually a couple of weeks, like for the smaller stuff. And,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
these phases, once again, SD can easily almost like a blend into the DD phase. But I will always like. Usually, when I say a CD phase, that's a phase when I'm hoping the owner doesn't change things much.
Right. So if we add in the week or so to get to know you phase, the contracts, the deposit request, the schematic design, the construction
Site
documents,
visit, scanning.
site visit. So we're probably a couple months in at this point.
Yes.
Okay. And have we engaged our engineering team yet?
Oh yeah, the engineering thing is being engaged hopefully from the early beginning.
Okay.
As we said during the walkthrough, so they know what they can actually what is the infrastructure of the building. And why we're trying to do it.
Especially if it's existing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'd like to have them earlier on.
So we eventually though we're going to have a final set on the architectural side, life safety plan, etc. And we're going to be like, okay, guys, this is the final layout. Here's the spec sheet for our equipment.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
what do you think? We're going to add a couple more weeks for that final wrap up with our engineers?
So so engineers are already in DD phase and they already are fully engaged into the project. And the CD phase, I prefer that we actually work simultaneously. Sometimes I see, I usually don't advise doing that, doing architectural first and then bringing engineers later, because we're always gonna carve the room for electrical panel, carve the room for extra HVAC requirements. We're losing that first original design, so earlier the better. So team works simultaneously.
I mean, we might put something somewhere where it's like the plumbing guys are like, we can't make the slope work for the pipe.
Exactly.
We just can't do it.
Or it's too many bands, Yeah. And it's it's good to have them all. And when CD is submitted, the CD should have all discipline involved into these drawings, and then it's gonna go straight to the city for a permit, and also it's gonna go to for bidding for a contractor.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I would like to mention is, which I see the trends, is design build process. That process, it's preferred by many because contractor is also early involved in a design from the CD. The reason they have them is because more accurate pricing.
You're also going to see this on larger projects because its pricing is that much more important.
Exactly.
But okay, so I'm just kind of stitching together this timeline to set some expectations.
Go ahead.
So on average, I'm thinking of a number between 1 to 2 months on average. So like a month and a half to where we submit, everything's pretty much done, buttoned up. We've gone through the SD, the DD, the CD phases. We're now submitting. And then once we get there, that's kind of out of our control.
Now
So I'm thinking that's an average plus minus,
Sure. So a couple of months. Now, on the commercial side, we submit all the permits on behalf of our client because
Yes.
we can do that digitally at pretty much everywhere now.
Yep.
Residential is coming, not quite there yet. They still want their physical copies. But we're now, and we still offer that service, but it's an add-on rather than included for the commercial side. So we're submitting for permit approval. Now that the city has it in their possession, what does that timeline look like? What's the expectation there?
Probably, if you call them on the phone, they're gonna tell you 30 days.
Yeah.
That's what they have.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's usually when you can expect, because once again, they're under stuff. We're talking about Columbus area only specific. I don't know how is other jurisdiction.
Oh, other jurisdictions can be 8 weeks to 12 weeks.
Exactly. Can be even worse.
Can be even worse.
Yeah. New
York
Literally
City.
12 weeks
Yeah, New
to
York
get
City.
Yeah.
comments back.
That's how they're really under stuff, and there is a lot of construction going on, which is good.
But
yeah,
sometimes we're not always waiting 30 days. They get back faster.
It's also that's one things that I keep mentioning. Why building that relationship with the city official is the key. So you can always introduce it's going to be even easier for them to understand the project if you engage them earlier on. Then you say, this is the project. I'm currently working on a project which is $600 million project. So we actually have bi-weekly meeting with the city officials about this project. And they already know, and they already know the schedule. They understand we understand what steps we have to go through to satisfy their requirements. So earlier engagement also with them, it can actually speed up the process a little bit.
Also, huge benefit to have someone that's local. Because
Yes.
obviously your firm is local.
Yes.
This is where the project is being built.
Yes.
You're working with the local officials.
Yes.
And everybody's on the same page so that things can move forward, step after step without having to jump over any hurdles.
Not only are they local, but are they doing projects of your nature? Because if we're doing a restaurant project that's similar to a restaurant project we did 3 months ago, the city's also going to recognize, the Arcfluence name or X firm.
Oh, these guys are good. It's going to go much smoother for us to review it. So definitely. Yeah. I mean, reputation is a key too. That's how you build a relationship, by reputation. I mean, nobody wants to hang out with the fellows who are not responsible and not doing good stuff.
And that reputation extends to our strategic partners, the surveyor, the MEP engineers, the structural engineer, the civil engineer,
Correct.
like that entire team. The better they, and technically it does fall to us for that coordination and communication. So we take a lot of that on our shoulders.
Yeah, because in majority of cases, we as an architect, all these MEP consultants are actually under our contract. So there is a possibility for an owner to do like separate primes to hire all these design entities separately.
But that can slow down a project.
It definitely can slow down the project. I usually recommend for an architect to bring his team. The only things what will be the responsibility of the client will be like a site survey, geotechnical reports.
And even then, we have contacts.
We have a contact that we can actually help them, like a special inspection that's going to be usually on the client side. I will say usually like a site survey, geotechnical report, special inspection that should be on a client side, but everything else should be on a design team side.
And I'll say this, something I've noticed over the last couple of years. A lot of firms now, to kind of streamline their businesses, are creating their own avatars, right? And a lot of these engineering firms that are partnering with architecture firms, they're sometimes refusing to work with the end client because it's a lot more hand-holding. And it's either they charge more and then it's just not worth the headache.
And to respect to our consultants, we just cannot put buildings together without them. Usually they don't like that because they don't feel comfortable in it. They don't do that in regular basis. Usually it's the architect one tidying everything. Consultants likes to concentrate about their stuff only.
Yeah. Plus, as the architect, we have some understanding
Correct.
on what's needed, what's going into a project, and what's coming from their side. If they're having a conversation with a client might be like, well, why? I'm just going from office to a restaurant. Why can't I just keep everything the same for my mechanical system? Like, I should be able to do that. And then, they make a big stink about it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we immediately understand there's different requirements. And yes, there's going to be impact. And yes, it's going to be, something that has to be done. We understand why and some of the science behind it and what's going into it, where the client might not necessarily. So again, like Nino said, it's like, it just becomes a headache for them.
Yeah, and if you have anyone that they're going currently or was going through the School of Architecture, he will tells you that it's very diverse program, where we actually not only being taught how to put like nice looking buildings, but also we have the basic understanding of mechanical, electrical, structural system, technology system.
Yeah.
So we can actually help in navigate connecting all these dots together.
Yeah, I love the other side of it, because now I'm just like, great, let's hire the engineer. Because going through school, I think for me the worst thing was concrete design.
Oh,
and
concrete design.
Calculating the reinforcement for the concrete. We actually had to go through and calculate everything out.
In iterations, so you're never gonna get to the number. You always have to get to the closer possible number when calculating concrete.
Those are the days I sat really close to you guys.
Yeah, and my friend Mike, he's a structural engineer. Like, when he first started, they actually made him calculate everything by hand. But now that he's gotten far enough along, and again, it's a level of understanding.
Yes.
So his level of understanding now is to the point where his firm is now like, great, you can use the software to help you, with your work, basically.
Yeah.
But when he first started out, he had to do everything by hand.
Well, you gotta go through your hands, man.
Yeah.
Gotta go through your hands.
All right, I'm gonna put my investor hat back on.
Go ahead.
I picked ArcFluence. I picked the architecture firm I want to work with, and I'm super pumped about my project. Now, what are some things that I can do as the investor to help streamline help the timeline, help my budget? What are some questions I should be asking you, the architects, to help us kind of like, how can we make this happen? How can we reduce costs?
First, many of our clients, they don't have even basic understanding of the construction. So some of them do, and that's probably going to be even easier. But I think that communication has to be very relaxed. The most important thing that you have to explain to your architect, what your end goals are. What are you trying to achieve with this building?
Yeah.
So end goals is the one that you as an owner has to have clearly defined in order to help architect adjust his design process, his design, and communication with all consultants in order to get you to that end goal.
Yeah. If we're working with existing conditions, I mean, it turns into a problem-solving exercise. And so if we have that end goal in mind so that we know the destination, then we can help navigate how to get there, work through whatever exceptions we have to work through, and hopefully get something that's very close to what they desire.
And it's not strange.
Yeah, knowing it up front is what is highly beneficial.
And, we as a designer, we don't really like the changes, especially late in the game, but that is out to be expected.
Sure.
So especially more experienced, and we are as an ArcFluence, quite experienced fellows. So we always can pull out some recommended changes that can adjust the requirements and still stay within the budget.
Well said. I'm going to be a little more specific.
And I will say, for me, my number one thing is just patience, right?
Yeah.
I get it. There's money involved. There's a timeline involved.
Paul, I'm an investor. I don't have patience. I want to get this thing going. I want it producing
income.
But you're
saying, you asked me, what's the thing that'll help move things along? If you have patience, it'll help everybody in the process.
So don't email the city late one night after I had a couple drinks.
No. No.
Especially when it gets to the city part, because all of that is out of our control. We cannot make them do something on a timeline
just for our project.
Just for our project, especially if it's a smaller scale project. The one guy in Upper Arlington is like, we have all these other projects that are X square feet and blah, blah, blah. And I'm doing this thing, whatever. Again, this was a single family home, it was a commercial project. But he's just like, I don't have time for this. Right. And people were pushing him to get things done immediately. And he's just like, you know what? I'm done. And threw his hands up. So, yeah, patience is critical. If you want things to go smoothly, you just have to be patient and trust that you'll get there quicker by having that patience.
And that's a realistic goal that you have to have in mind. I mean, you told you in advance, like it's gonna take city minimum 30 days to review your project.
And if it's faster, then
it's faster,
everyone's
great.
happy.
That's
Yeah.
the cherry on top. But if it
Exactly.
isn't, you need to be patient.
Okay, let me go a little bit more specific on how we can potentially cut costs on a project. So I was kind of leaning towards the whole civil engineering piece, which it can be very expensive in commercial projects if we're dealing with stormwater management, and I know there's some specific
Size-specific requirements.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this works in the benefit if it's a smaller scale project, because if you keep your area of disturbance under a certain square footage, I think it's 10,000 square feet, and impervious area. So
Which
those
is what,
two things
2,000 square
together,
feet?
2,000 square feet. So if you're doing something with parking and you're doing an addition onto a smaller scale, commercial space, as long as your square footages are under those requirements, then you're not going to be triggered into the stormwater and all this kind of stuff. So again, if you're right on that verge, that would be something I would advise to the investor. Why not scale back 100 square feet, 200 square feet, get you under that threshold? Otherwise, you're going to be looking at a civil engineer, and you're going to pay them another $10,000, $20,000, $30,000,
$40,000.
yeah, to do all this additional work.
And you're going to cut down on the actual construction of it too. So you're
Correct.
saving
I
on all
think
fronts.
that's a really good example, especially if that is being attacked earlier on.
Yeah.
So that's what you need, good design professionals who knows all this stuff.
And that's a conversation that we would try to have with our clients,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
What do you really need, and could you get by with a couple hundred square foot less, so we don't trigger all these additional changes?
And one of when I say end goals, one of them is when you want to open the project, when you want to open the project. I mean, when project is going to
Tomorrow.
go live. Good luck with
Yeah,
that.
every day is tomorrow.
Yes,
yeah.
yesterday.
Every client is yesterday.
Not tomorrow,
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Then how much money do you have, and what is your budget? Like these are two most important things: time, budget that you have in your mind. Do you have preferred contractor that you have previously good experience with? We can help you that too. Like we work with the contractors, but we have really good experience. We work with some that maybe not that great either.
Sure.
So we can advise you on that. So it's like a very nice, and we can help you also define a goal. You're always gonna have something in your mind.
Yeah.
Or how much square footage I want. I want to return in my investment quickly. I want to, you know what I'm saying? So all of these clients have different end goals, but clearly stating the end goal is going to help your design team to funnel his design decision, timeline, schedule everything or just to make you know what, maybe you have to adjust your end goal a little bit.
Yeah, and obviously, if the contractor is involved at certain stages, we can have conversations with him on how to reduce cost. So if cost is a major concern, and that's what you're worried about.
Which usually is.
Yeah. Then like Nino said earlier, if there's like some equipment that you have to invest money into because you're switching from the, office space to the restaurant space, then there's some equipment or some other electrical things that you have to upgrade and you have to spend money there. Fine, then we're going to have to take money from the material side and put in some materials that cost less. And the contractor will help with that. We have
They still look good, but
Yeah.
it'll cost a little bit less.
We'll
Yeah.
have a general idea, but like someone like that, he, she, whoever that's doing the work, they're in it daily, checking, prices of material, prices of labor. So they're going to have a finger on the pulse to know exactly how to get things done.
And
for the budget that you're shooting for.
And we also offer services to be part of that process while construction is going
Correct.
on too.
Yes.
So some of our clients, I would say probably most of our clients, we engage them just for CDs, construction documents, and permit approval. But there are also some projects that we stay involved with. Obviously, if something comes up, we're available.
So that's a next phase that we call the construction administration. CA phase. So that's pretty much when we can sign the contract with the owner to have periodically to visit the site to inspect the quality of the work being. So our goal as an architect, not to tell contractor how to build stuff. That's means and methods. Means and methods are the responsibility of the contractor. Exactly. So our goal is just to make sure that what is actually being installed, built, executed matches with construction document. So that's the goal of the architect. Sometimes, if the site is not secure, he has to give it attention to the buildings, to the supervisor, site supervisor, if there are some unsafe conditions. That's the only things that we and also what we also can do, we actually can review the submittals specific for the projects. If there are any RFIs, and construction always brings the RFIs.
If there's clarity that's needed on something, I mean, we note it in our drawings that immediately you need to reach out back to the architectural team for clarification. So
and that's going back to RFIs. So anything that is involved with the contractor, the client, any additional information that we need to provide or provide clarity on, that would be something that's additional and after the fact. That's usually after permit approval.
Exactly, that is after. RFIs can even come during the bidding, depending on the size of the project, which we call the bidding RFIs. But majority RFIs are actually coming in the construction. When they come there and discover something that we just couldn't see it because we don't have X-ray visions. So in that case,
they might remove a ceiling and then all of a sudden, oh, these walls don't go all the way up, right? Well, okay, that's a problem. They submit that request for information, and then we go from there.
And when
unforeseen conditions.
And when we do the site visit, and we actually gonna assemble the report site, and then in that report is gonna be one copy is gonna be sent digitally. It's gonna send to the contractor. The second is gonna be sent to the owner. So the owner has better understanding what's going on the site. Some owners go in direction to not have an architect during the CA, but majority owner will still like to have designer's eyes during the construction.
Yeah, I would say on the smaller commercial projects, it's probably less necessary.
Yes.
And we take the more
I'll challenge you on that, though.
Oh, I know.
I would say it's more necessary because you might have a contractor who only does residential work. And all of a sudden, he's like, you know what? I'm going to try to do some commercial work. It's a small-scale commercial project. Why not? It's great.
Well, Paul's referencing something that just happened with us.
But I'm challenging you on that point that, maybe you don't need it. I think you actually, it's better to have it.
It is better to have it.
Because then it's less likely you're going to create hurdles that you have to then navigate, right? So again, you talk about advice to make the project go smoother. I would say have your design team, your architect, your design professional involved in the construction administration process.
And many designers like to be involved in CA phase only because they would like to see the execution of the contract document to the end.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to think that because it's a smaller project, I probably don't need them and I'll save some money. But at the end of the day, it's worth the little bit of extra, a couple thousand extra to have them on board.
And that's my point. Yeah. And that's why I said it. Because as an investor, I'm always putting myself in the investor's shoes and what they're thinking and what their goals are.
Oh, you'll save money. But
because, as you guys you've designed your entire life as architects on big projects, and you have your lane, right? And you've stayed in that. Where I kind of see I see both sides really.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, ooh, it's tough to make both parties happy sometimes, and sometimes there's a compromise there.
Yeah.
You have to understand that your design professional should be your subject matter expert, right? And he's the one who's going to know. They're the ones that are going to know everything that is required to get your project done and to get the goal that you want at the end of the day met.
Yeah, and that's another thing that you have to play with it is if I maybe involved my contractors earlier on during even design phase, probably your CA time designer is going to be less because they're more in tune into it. From the early on and understand the topic and all the challenges. But when you actually hire a contractor later on, and especially as Paul mentioned, if someone who was doing, he doesn't have that big experience or reputation that is required, then you will probably save yourself on a long term a lot of money by just hiring architect to do the CA work.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if your project gets delayed and you're borrowing hard money.
Money and time. And time is obviously, as an investor, you could have holding costs and other things.
Not only that, just loss of income.
Yeah, we're not talking manufactured product. We're talking about construction, and always something goes south. So it's always unforeseen conditions.
Especially with existing buildings.
That's
just why in general the fees are actually a little bit higher for an existing building for somebody to go in and do a renovation on the construction side, on the design
Rather
side.
than a new build.
Yeah, rather than a piece of dirt where everything is new and you build everything from scratch, right? There's certain conditions that you still have to work around.
Especially if something being added later on is not part of the original construction. I'll be surprised if you don't even have foundations under these walls.
So we had Nat on, a couple episodes ago, and again, what was one thing he said? The thing that he noticed trend-wise with projects that have problems. Any project he goes into that had an addition done at some point in time, right? So it's like, especially if you have an existing building where you had it was this originally, they did some addition, now we're doing something else, and we're coming in at this point. Again, a lot of unforeseen issues and things that were just done whatever back then.
Sure, on older buildings, sometimes the original structure was done better than the addition that was done later.
Because the addition may be done by the owner by itself. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Yeah, and it may not be the developer executed. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really good foundation for small commercial projects. Obviously, I want to dive into some larger projects on another episode that we're currently bidding on, which is super exciting.
Well, we can talk about some of our past work too. I mean, I worked 10 years in Chicago working on high rises.
Sure.
So,
Yeah,
And I
and
know
Nino's
Nino
in
mentioned
right in the
earlier
middle
that,
of all these hospital developments right now,
yeah,
too.
he's working on a $600 million project, right?
yeah,
So,
it is.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother conversation, like you said.
That's a whole nother podcast, folks.
Exactly. Yes, it is.
All right, with that said, we're going to wrap this thing up. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
This has been the ArcFluence Podcast. As always, you can get more information and additional content on arcfluence.com. Please subscribe on the platform of your choice and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.